Today we're exploring power struggles in marriage, something that my clients have increasingly been struggling with in our sessions. And to better help them and you, I dove into some incredible insights from Terry Real, a therapist and author, as well as my own research into patriarchy and matriarchy, and what it takes to heal from power struggles in relationships. This topic is so big, my friends, that you're not going to want to miss this. If you're anything like my clients, you probably don't even recognize you're having power struggles, but you notice resentment building in your life. And when you really get down to it, you recognize that a lot of that resentment does come from power struggles that you didn't even recognize. Let's jump in. Hey parents, welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. Do you want to raise your kids better and have a stronger marriage? Are you up late at night researching marriage and parenting tools and self-care tips? Do you start each day hoping for deeper connections and less chaos, but it ends with family arguments and going 12 different directions again? My name's Kendra, wife, mom, therapist, and growth enthusiast. It wasn't until I discovered how to fulfill my unmet needs that I was finally able to show up as my best self, as a spouse and parent. I realized that by meeting my needs, I could more fully meet the needs of my family, with more energy and less resentment. In this podcast, I teach parents skills like boundary setting, prioritizing personal needs, communication, and claiming ownership. Just like my clients, you'll be shocked by the improvement in your marriage, parenting, and personal life when you focus on fulfilling your important, unmet needs. Ready to prioritize yourself so you can quit mentally throat punching people? Then grab those earbuds and head outside, and let's rock and talk. Hey friends, welcome back to episode number 118, Power Struggles, Rethinking Power Dynamics in Modern Families. Now this is a tricky topic to talk about because most of the time my clients don't recognize that they are having power struggles. They come in because they feel resentful and then they feel shame about feeling resentful in their relationships. And there's all these layers that are kind of complicated and difficult to understand. But as we work on things layer by layer and peel that back, what we find is this underlying power struggle. And often, because I generally work with conservative Christians or faith-led people, though definitely not always, with this demographic, there's some cultural differences compared to others. And now this can happen in any culture, and it very much does. So don't tune out if you're not that certain demographic, because I guarantee you will find your spot in this as well. Today we're going to explore the challenges of patriarchy and matriarchy in our homes and how that connects to part of the problem. Quickly, before we jump right in, I want to mention one-on-one coaching. If you are looking for more accountability, if you are looking for some expertise and some simple guidance and direction that's not complicated, but just breaking it down into actionable steps, come and sign up for one-on-one coaching. You can sign up on fulfillmenttherapy.org, and those are rates for the current market value of therapy, except for this has a lot more tools and resources that you can utilize. So go ahead and check that out and try it. See what it does to improve your family life and your relationships and your marriage. All right, let's hop into the meat of today. I want to start by talking about Terry Real for a second. So Terry Real is somebody that I've increasingly been hearing about as I've been reading books and as I've been talking to colleagues and friends, and I don't really know how he escaped my notice, but he has written several books and he's also a therapist and he just has a lot of experience. So I've been reading his book and listening to some interviews from both him and other people that I really admire recently so that I can help my clients more. And he said a lot of things that I wanted to speak to today because they really resonated with me and they've been resonating with my clients as I brought them up. This is one thing he said. It's not disharmony that's the problem. It's the inability to go from disharmony to repair that is the problem. he doesn't go straight into the patriarchy and matriarchy thing, but he talks about how in many families, it's perfectly normal, which was very validating to even me, to have conflict, to have disharmony. That is part of the human experience. You are okay if there is disharmony in your home. The problem is when we don't repair those things. And I might have mentioned this earlier, but my exchange student said to me, you guys often apologize, and that is not a culture that I'm used to. That's not something that we do as much in my country, or that I see as much. And that made me so sad to think that. But it's also something that I very much have had to work on. That was not my initial culture either, even if there are certain family members that might have been better at it or worse at it. In general, I didn't really see that practiced too much. So I've had to play catch up very quickly, and maybe you're like me in that regard. When I talk to my clients about their upbringing, which I generally do as part of therapy, they often tell me that things weren't discussed after arguments. So after that conflict or those arguments, life just went on without any apologies, without any ownership or validation or acknowledgement. And I want you to explore your own family life right now. What does it look like after arguments? And maybe in your mind, you think that you do repair and you do take ownership and you do apologize. But maybe check in with your family members. Ask them, do you think I apologize when I make mistakes? Do you think I take ownership? Do you think we as a family culture as a whole, do you think we repair as much as we could? And just see what they say. If you really want to increase that family connection and create a healthy home atmosphere, it's important to prioritize repair and set aside that time for those heartfelt conversations or those apologies in your own home. So let me just give you a quick tip for this. Maybe this looks like scheduling a regular family meeting to address any tension or conflict that might have come up in the last few days, and allow each family member to express their feelings and perspectives, to express their feelings and their thoughts on things in a safe and respectful place without becoming heated. And this often requires doing it a little later, but coming back and revisiting that. Now I want to talk briefly about empowerment in relationships. Like I mentioned, I often work with a lot of religious clients, and there is this pattern that I've seen emerge that when there are these traditional gender roles, there's this underlying tension or this push and pull and these power struggles that ensue. Terry Real said this, under the patriarchal system, you can either be connected or powerful, but you can't be both. I was unsure how this would go over with some of my clientele because, like I said, many of you are quite traditional, which is completely fine, or quite conservative, I should say. And anything that sounds or feels like it might threaten beliefs causes people to shut down. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying anything about anything religious. I'm talking about cultural norms. For example, in my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, people largely believe that this is a very patriarchal system. And in some ways, I agree with that. And in other ways, as I've done further research, I recognize that is actually not what it is. There is some elements of patriarchy where the priesthood was set up, handing it down from father to son. And so there is this patriarchal order in that way. But when you really look at what patriarchy and matriarchy or feminism and all of these other things mean, you get a better understanding of what it is that conservative cultures believe or want in their families. And it's often not what is actually existing. What I'm actually hearing about in my sessions with my clients is that there is this unhealthy dynamic or these unfair sharing of roles in the relationship. Those traditional gender roles have led to resentment and frustration in their marriage. I'm not interested in a debate on whether or not you should stay at home with your kids or if the mom should work or any of those things. That's truly not what this is about. What I am interested in is the positive and negative results that we're seeing in these homes, whether it's a patriarchal home or even this matriarchal home. As I hear my clients' stories, I wonder if we're missing the mark. Are we too far on either side? Now, mostly you don't hear people talk about matriarchy anymore, but I feel like feminism has morphed into something that is more matriarchal. So initially, feminism started to make sure that there were equal gender roles, but over time, it feels like it's become tainted somewhat, and there is more of this bitterness and resentfulness and anger and this putting down of men in general instead of elevating or working collaboratively, working together. So whether you want to call it matriarchy, whether you want to call it feminism, whatever it is, there's this one side where the woman is very much in control and has the majority of the power, and on the other side, it is the man that has the majority of this power. So are we too far on either side in our home? It's interesting, and Terry Real even talked about this, about how vulnerability and authenticity is so much connected to this. If we can be truly authentic and vulnerable in our interaction with our spouse, or in any relationship, there really isn't a need for dominance by either side, by the masculine or the feminine. It's more of a biarchy, and I actually had to look up that word. So a biarchy is when two people lead. And I recognize in a fallen world, in this world with mortal people with many flaws, it's very difficult to achieve this successfully. In my research, I came across this scripture, which many of you know if you are Christian, and it says, "Neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in the Lord." There's an equality. We both need each other. It's a collaborative, interpersonal relationship. So if you are a Latter-day Saint, which many of my listeners are, but not all, again, this can apply to anyone, but on their website it says, men and women are equal. One is not superior to the other. They are also different, with different roles within a family. Both men and women fulfill their highest purpose together as husband and wife, not separately. So there are differences, and yet there is this complete equality. So in that way, when people say Latter-day Saints have this patriarchal society, I'm like, well, maybe culturally, but ultimately that is really not what we're looking for. We are looking for this biarchy where there's that equality where both are essentially leading, but maybe in different ways. I want to read some other scriptures that I really like that very much apply to any belief system, but it is very profound. This is what it says. "We have learned by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men, or people in general, as soon as they get a little authority, as they suppose, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion. Hence many are called, but few are chosen. No power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood," or even get rid of that part. So no power or influence can or ought to be maintained only by persuasion, by long suffering, by gentleness and meekness, and by love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly enlarge the soul without hypocrisy and without guile. Now, I need to break that down a little bit, but I love that. As soon as people get authority, they begin to exercise that unrighteous dominion. Like it's our fallen nature to do so. That natural man, that part of us that's our lower self instead of our higher self. We naturally want to go to that, to scramble for that power. And there's very few that really do that well, that handle that authority well. And that is why those relationships break down, like the law of entropy that I talked about a long time ago. And then this other line, when we use persuasion or long-suffering or gentleness and meekness, and that unfeigned love or like authentic love, and with kindness and pure knowledge, that's when we really thrive in our families and in our relationships. It's so well said. I love that scripture. That's from Doctrine and Covenants 121. 39 through 42. And as always, I will have this in the show notes for you to access on your own. So again, whether you are religious or not, there is great truth in this, and I find truth wherever I can find it. So I hope you'll open your mind and your heart to it. Now I'm just going to give you a quick little tip for this kind of thing. How can you be more authentic in your relationship? How can you have a relationship without exercising that unrighteous dominion? And this goes for men and women. Please, in your mind, do not just think it's the men. Well, one thing you can do is be more assertive. Express your feelings and your needs. Use I statements. Refrain from blaming or criticizing the other person. And check in with your family. Ask them questions like, do you think I'm a little too controlling or I use my authority unwisely? Do you think I'm a little too domineering? How do you see that? What can I do to improve that? So I'm leading more with persuasion and long-suffering and gentleness and meekness and authenticity and kindness. You can ask them some simple questions. It obviously depends on the age. If you have a younger child, you want to simplify that speech, but just explore some of those things. All right, I want to talk very briefly about meeting unmet needs and about meeting unmet needs in our families and how this ties together. I want to start with another quote by Terry Real that I just love. This sums up what I talk about all the time, but he just says it very well. This is what he says. Family pathology rolls from generation to generation like a fire in the woods, taking down everything in its path until one person in one generation has the courage to turn and face the flames. My friends, this is exactly what I'm talking about with power struggles, with unrighteous dominion, with unbalanced gender roles, with matriarchy or patriarchy. What are you doing to change that generational pathology? Do you have the courage to turn and face the flames and change that culture? So what does this have to do with unmet needs? Well, maybe your family members have difficulty expressing what their unmet needs are. Maybe they feel like there hasn't been enough repair on things in the past, and they don't feel like it's a safe place to talk about those things and be authentic and vulnerable. Changing just a couple key things, like I mentioned before, will really help with this. And another simple tip is you can practice actively listening and express empathy when a family member actually does have the courage to express their needs or their concerns. And in those moments, try to understand and validate their perspective, especially before you offer solutions or advice. That's very difficult for anybody. Do a little bit better. Hold off a little longer on those solutions or advice. All right, my friends, I just want to end with 5 simple things that you can do to minimize or eliminate power struggles in your relationships. Namely, your marriages, but really anything. So the first one is something like I just mentioned. So practice that active listening. Are you truly listening to your spouse's perspective without interrupting them or without invalidating them? Are you trying to understand their point of view before expressing your own? And do you communicate that empathy? Even as I say those things, I'm like, I don't know that I've completely done that recently. Like my husband and I just had a discussion this morning, and I'm pretty confident I didn't do those things. So I'm making this mental note to repair right away when I'm done with this. Number 2, foster mutual respect. Do you have mutual respect for one another? Do you value each other? Do you talk about the contributions you each make, about what you notice that they're doing? When you talk about things, do you do it in a way that's not belittling or dismissive? Do you treat each other with kindness and consideration, like those scriptures that I mentioned, or how to do things without that unrighteous dominion? The next one is share responsibilities equally. So divide the household chores, divide childcare duties, and decision-making responsibilities fairly. This goes both ways. I know a lot of wives out there that are so resentful, but they are part of the problem. Sometimes they say they don't want those things, but they are very particular about how things are done. So essentially, they are setting these parameters themselves by being unfair in how things are carried out. And also another way I see it is sometimes wives expect their husbands to be the breadwinner when they do have the time, even though they say they don't, to bring in some money or to help alleviate some burden in even another way, and expressing what that could look like and being open to it, even if it's inconvenient for you. And I'm going to be the first one to raise my hand here. I could do this in better ways. I also just want to briefly talk about that division of household chores. In very traditional, conservative, religious homes, women will say like, oh, my husband would never do that. Well, that might be an assumption, and maybe there is going to be some pushback, but anytime there are boundaries, it's up to you to maintain those boundaries. My husband wasn't overly thrilled about dividing up cooking responsibilities or laundry, but when we talked about it and broke it down in a respectful way, especially as we recognized that we were both working the same amount, then he understood why it was important to divide up more of those household chores at this stage when it might have looked a little different before. But even if he is working full-time, I know a lot of women think, well, I need to get up with the kids all the time, or I need to do this all the time because he works 8 hours a day. Well, if you break it down, are you working 12 hours a day? Do not sit down. If that's the case, it's going to cause a major resentment, and chances are pretty good that he is more willing to do something than you realize if you would communicate your wants and your needs in a respectful, loving way. All right, number 4, set clear boundaries. I already alluded to this, but it's really important to set those clear boundaries and expectations in the relationship. This requires clear communication about your needs and even your preferences so that you can avoid that misunderstanding and you can avoid those conflicts. Now, maybe not completely, but you can definitely minimize them. Last but not least, number 5, seek compromise and resolution. It's important to approach disagreements with a willingness to find some common ground and compromise. Compromise is really difficult for a lot of people, but that is what decreases resentment. So focus on finding those solutions that can benefit both sides. And I tell my kids this all the time too. Like, explore what is a win-win for both of you, instead of just focusing on winning the argument or winning that power struggle. Be proactive in addressing conflicts and resolving those issues together. So those are 5 tips, again, that will help minimize or eliminate power struggles in your marriage. It just depends on how humble each side is. And if you can recognize some conflict is part of the human experience. We are doing okay, but this is a way to elevate our fulfillment and become our better self. My friends, when we prioritize repair and we practice assertive communication, as well as foster that mutual respect, we really do pave the way for healing, for growth and fulfillment in our families. When we share those responsibilities and set those clear boundaries and commit to compromise, we're able to create an environment where each family member feels valued and supported. And this creates stronger, more resilient relationships. Listeners, remember, we're all learning. We are all human. As long as we continue to repair and continue to try to change those unhelpful cultural patterns, then your family is going to be okay. They just want to see that you're willing to keep trying. You're going to keep digging in and you're going to keep doing all you can to grow. I'm going to end with Terry Real's quote that I read earlier. Family pathology rolls from generation to generation like a fire in the woods, taking down everything in its path until one person in one generation has the courage to turn and face the flames. My friends, I pray that you will have the courage to turn and face the flames so that you and your loved ones can become your best self with greater fulfillment. That's all I have for you today, my friends. Don't forget to check out the show notes that tell you all of the things and send you to all of the places, because we have a massive amount of change that is coming throughout the summer. I have an incredible new team with at least 5, but maybe 6 interns that are working with me to bring you so much more. They're going to help me roll out things like a blog and breaking down all that information, more infographics, more tools, more free resources. And they're even going to help me roll out those courses so that you can have more bite-sized, digestible teachings and trainings and accountability to help you and your family find fulfillment. Have an incredible week, my friends. And as always, I will see you back here in just a few days. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you. No matter what your house or your hair looks like, I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.